now we have another story. And I know one of the reasons why I'm telling these stories is I read this book a lot of times and had to make sense of them. She does not tell stories straightforwardly. She kind of bounces around, and it's like only by reading the book a couple of times do you get all the drama and intrigue of it. And I wonder if she actually writes that way to bewilder the reader, because the social situations are just so bewildering when she meets them. All right, so there's a family named the Reginiers. They moved down from the north, and right off the bat, they start having a pattern of problems. He gets vertigo, the husband gets vertigo, the wife gets terrible backaches, a malaise falls over them, they don't want to work. Then their farm itself becomes afflicted when the cows stop giving milk and get other illnesses in the cattle. That's a sign of being bewitched. So this dude shows up, Jean Baban. Oh, we're going to hear about him quite a bit in the coming chapters. Jean Baban's a pal of theirs. He shows up and he enunciates them. He's like, this is witchcraft. Now, actually, Faversada is around here because Jean Baban, at this point already, believes that she is secretly a very powerful unwitcher and his younger brother is bewitched. So, with the enunciation, Baban declares them to be bewitched, in fact, by a witch named the Lady from Ize. Now, if Baban never showed up and never made the announcement, then they wouldn't have been locked into this system of witchcraft. They would not have been locked into a system that requires doing violence and killing the witch. We also note that he's the one who names the witch. The unwitcher is coming in a second, and the unwitcher never names the witch. So the enunciator, in this sense, perpetuates the system. They keep the system going. You need to have an enunciator to have an unwitcher, to have an accusation of witchcraft. So the enunciation really gets it going. When someone says, this is not natural, this must be witchcraft, who hates you? Yes. So the wife describes the area they live, which is different than the place they come from, as a place that is not properly Christian. And I found this really interesting. She says that a proper Christian attitude, which she was able to have in her former home, was to turn the other cheek, to not engage in violence. But Christianity doesn't work in the face of great supernatural evil. Christianity is thought to not work. You can pray to God all you want or go to a priest. The witchcraft will get you. An earlier healer actually makes this note, which I think is really interesting. She says to, the healer says to Faversada, they say there are savages in Africa, but you who've read so much, do you know anyone more savage than we are? They really do see how violent and destructive, and they're aware of just how violent and destructive these practices and these dynamics are. All right. So this is a violent culture, and you'll notice that all of the metaphors for witchcraft are about force and violence. So what happens to the Reginiers? Well, first, they don't really want to talk to Faversadas. They're reluctant to talk because they don't want to be considered, believers or be considered foolish. They don't want to have gossip that they believe in spells. But the funny thing is, they believed that they were bewitched and then unwitched. So they're like, oh, that's a bunch of hooey. But they believed enough to have an unwitcher come. They believed enough to be bewitched. They believed enough to be afraid that it would come back. In fact, she's afraid to, the wife is afraid to speak to Faversada because after the unwitching process, Madame Marie, their unwitcher, actually gave them a whole bunch of practices to do to prevent witchcraft from attacking again or returning. In fact, she gave them a bent nail, which is placed in a small fabric bag filled with salt and herbs. Now, why a bent nail? Faversada posits that is the bending of the witches. It represents the bending of the witch's vital force, so it can no longer attack the victims because it's bent. It's bent in two. It's doubled up onto itself. Okay. They don't carry the bent nail in the bag with the herbs and the salt. There are also always more witches. There's no shortage of witches. So you should be doing your practices to make sure, and doing your little rituals to make sure you don't get further afflicted, because there's always witches out there. So what is the battle? So Madame Marie comes. She is the unwitcher. Someone enunciated them. It was Jean Baban, who said it's the Lady of Ease. The unwitcher never names the witch. They think that the witch must live by. Why? Because for witchcraft to work, you have to be touched. So the witch has to be local. There's no distant witches. So the young witcher, Madame Marie, never names the witch, but she does varied rituals and conducts psychic battles. And eventually, this woman from Ys dies. Jean Bauban says that she must be the witch because she died. So it's sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. The young witcher, perhaps wisely, never names anybody, because after all, if she doesn't name anybody, she could get some more money out of these folks if they get sick again. The Reginiers, in fact, feel very guilty because they take on sort of responsibility. They feel they killed the witch, but they also think there's nothing they could do. They're reluctant to acknowledge their role in the death of this woman. Now, the woman actually died in a hospital, and Favre Sada is able to get access to the hospital records. And in those records, we see that the doctors noted that she had a diminished mental capacity, and she dwindled away before dying of natural causes, but there was never a cause for this dwindling. There was never a cause for her to become sick in the way she was. And it did line up with the young witcher coming and starting to do battle against her. Favre Sada, to really note how horrific some of this can be, she tells a story about a priest who was also an unwitcher. And that priest had a partitioner who became bewitched and was convinced that the witch, who was an unwitcher, had bewitched him. This bewitched man actually killed the priest. Now, in the past, this priest was known to Favre Sada, and she lent him a book on witchcraft. And when she showed Madame Marie, her unwitcher, the book, she just took it from him. She confiscated it. So Favre Sada was always sort of worried that she wasn't able to give this guy the book back. So she was troubled by this. So she found a new version of the book and went to give it to him, but he was dead. I keep wondering why she gets stuck on this. Did she wonder that that unwitcher, that priest, might witch her? Might have bewitched her because she didn't give his book back? And also, do you remember we said earlier that there was a priest who was an enthusiast of magnetism at the beginning of these lectures? Could that be the same priest? This book does this thing where it reveals interesting ideas and then conceals them at the same time, which makes it, I think, a really interesting project. Now, all of this is the beginning. For soon, Favre Sada will be enunciated, and all these characters are going to interact in new dynamics that includes Favre Sada working closely with her own unwitcher.